Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa. Wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qad aflaha man zakkaha wa qad khaba man dassaha. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Welcome back to day 7 of the Viral Spirituality Bites. Last time we left off, we were talking about the nafs and how there are various stages that the nafs goes through that the ulama have mentioned on its path to purification. And 3 rough buckets that we talked about, and obviously it's a spectrum. It's not like you're at A and then B and then C. It's like a vast spectrum that goes from 0 to, let's say, 1,000 or 100. So number 1 was the an-nafsul ammara, like the commander. The nafs that commands the person towards sin and is so dominant that it basically overwhelms the person's personality, and this person essentially becomes like an unbridled nafs. It does whatever it wants, it eats whatever it wants, it sleeps whenever it wants, it hurts whoever it wants. It doesn't care about any rules and regulations. It just does whatever makes it happy. Right? In the West, we say that, right? Just do whatever makes you happy. And this is essentially a sign of having that kind of nafs, the nafs ammara. It just commands you and you say, yes, sir, I'm doing it. So the next step that a person can have on the purification of their nafs, the next level, which is better, is called an-nafsul lawwama, which is the self-reproaching soul, which is, I like to call the Jekyll and Hyde. Right? It has good and it has bad. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It still has the desire to commit sin. And sometimes it dominates the person and the person falls into a sin. But immediately after committing the sin, the person comes to their senses and they realize that they shouldn't have done that and they regret it. And they make tawbah and they turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. They are afraid of the consequences. They are afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're afraid of they're ashamed of what they did, and they pledge never to do it again. And essentially, this is tawbah. The fact that a person feels remorse over what they did is a sign that they have this nafsul lawwama. Right? And obviously, it's not a black and white where it's either you feel remorse or you don't. One person may feel a bit of remorse when they do something bad. Another person may feel like it's the end of the world and there's like a mountain about to fall on them, right? And those are 2 very different levels, actually, right? And it's our goal to take our nafs from that spectrum, from the lower end to the higher end. And we should also note that the amount of nadama, the amount of sorrow and regret that we feel over a sin decreases the more we indulge in it. Right? So the first time, let's say a person lied or they did something wrong, they feel horrible and they promise themselves never to do it again. But after a while, if they do it again and again and again, they become habituated to it, they become desensitized. Right? They become desensitized to the point where they don't even care anymore. Right? So they're basically going down that slippery slope towards the nafsul ammara, where it doesn't even care. It does whatever it wants and doesn't even care afterwards. So if we're seeing that now we regret and we have more shame over our bad deeds than in the past, alhamdulillah, we're progressing. However, if we become desensitized, before, if you saw a ghair mahram in the street, you feel like you would have to make wudu again, right, to gain that sense of purity, and it would distract you and it would hurt you. And now it doesn't even matter. You're just walking around and you see this, you see that. Yeah, you lower your gaze once in a while, but it doesn't make any difference. You've become desensitized. This is a bad sign. And then the third level that we talked about was the an-nafsul mutma'inna, the one that I like to call the wali, the friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is that soul that has become contented. It no longer fears falling into sin, right? It no longer fears falling into some kind of fitna like that. It no longer, yes, there can be mistakes, but it doesn't want to fall into sin, right? In the previous two levels, it wants to, the nafs inclines towards the sin and the person resists it. In this case, the nafs itself has become so tame and so good that the nafs itself wants to do good. Yes, every person is a sinner except for the prophets. So mistakes will happen. No one can ever claim that they are perfectly sin-free. And this contented soul has also gained that contentment in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Allah, whatever makes you happy makes me happy. They're completely content with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we also ended with, just to kind of finish off the recap, that science nowadays, using their imaging techniques, etc., have noticed that the front part of the person's brain, the prefrontal cortex, is the part of the brain that seems to perform these nafsi kind of actions in our behavior. And in the Quran, it mentions regarding an evil person that if he does not desist, لَنَسْفَعًا بِالنَّاصِيَةِ, we shall drag him by the forelock. نَاصِيَةٍ كَاذِبَةٍ خَاطِئَةٍ. What kind of a forelock, what kind of a prefrontal cortex does a person have? كَاذِبَةٍ, a lying one. خَاطِئَةٍ, it makes errors, sinning. So the Quran also hints at the fact that this behavior seems to emanate from this part of the brain. And then at the end of the same surah, Surah Al-Alaq, it mentioned that it mentions the Prophet ﷺ to bow down and to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, place your prefrontal cortex, place the seat of your desires and your emotions down to the ground and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what gets a person close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I wanted to talk about this process, right? And this is actually a process, and some people like to analogize it to a path of purification of the nafs. How does one purify the nafs? What are the goals of this purification? How is it a part of deen? Is this something that people have just made up? Or is it really have some kind of solid backing in terms of the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, authentic hadith? Okay, so what is purification of the nafs? Isn't it sufficient to perform the 5 pillars of Islam? Some people, they come up to you and they say that, right? That what are you talking about, this purification of the nafs? What is all this stuff? I never heard about it, right? Isn't it enough if I just pray 5 times a day, give my zakat, perform hajj, fast in the month of Ramadan, and say the shahada? Isn't that enough? And then they might even present this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أن أعرابيا أتى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال دلني على عمل إذا عملته دخلت الجنة. That a Bedouin came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, tell me of such a deed as will make me enter paradise if I do it. Right? Oftentimes people would come with these sort of questions to the Prophet ﷺ, asking for brief, concise advice that would get them to Jannah. And the Sahaba used to love it when these Bedouins used to come and ask questions, because they were very shy to ask lots of questions. So they liked it when someone else came and asked questions and they got to hear the answers. SubhanAllah. They had such adab with the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ replied to him, قَالَ تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُ بِهِ شَيْئًا وتقيم الصلاة المكتوبة وتؤدي الزكاة المفروضة وتصوم رمضان قال والذي نفسي بيده لا أزيد على هذا. لا أزيد على هذا. This is the part that I wanted to emphasize here. فلما ولى قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من سره أن ينظر إلى رجل من أهل الجنة فلينظر إلى هذا. So the Prophet ﷺ basically told him to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not have any partners with him, and to offer the 5 prescribed compulsory prayers, pay the zakat, and fast the month of Ramadan. The Bedouin said, by him in whose hands my life is, he's swearing by Allah, I will not do more than this. Okay, so this is where the people draw their dalil, their proof that you don't need to do anything more than just the faraid, let alone any of this purification, wish-washy stuff, right? When the Bedouin left, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever likes to see a man of paradise, then he may look at this man. So a person can get confused and say, hey, how come it seems to indicate that, none of these nawafil, none of these sunan, none of these things are necessary in order to get into Jannah? And the answer is, yes, if a person was able to perform the 5 pillars of Islam the way they ought to be performed, right? The way they ought to be performed and perform no sins, then yes, this is sufficient. The deen in and of itself is completely sufficient. The faraid are enough to get a person into Jannah, no doubt about it. However, if you're like me and most of the people around us, we commit sins. We are not able to perform our prayer the way we are supposed to perform our prayer. And I'm not talking about the external form, I'm talking about the internal form. How many of us are really able to concentrate in our salah? How many of us are really able to fast the way we're supposed to fast? SubhanAllah. How many are able to perform Hajj the way Hajj is supposed to be performed? I think if any one of us was truly honest in this introspection and looked at themselves carefully, they would come away saying that, yes, I am not able to perform these the way they ought to be performed. So there is a certain level of inner purification that is also required in order to be able to perform these things the way they're supposed to be performed. There is an outer form to these forms of worship, and there's also an inner form. Right? If you were to go to a mufti and say, I prayed and I wasn't able to think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my prayer, I wasn't able to concentrate, but I did all the arkan, I did all the basic movements of the prayer, I recited what I had to recite, the mufti would say your prayer is technically done, right? But is it accepted in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What kind of reward can you expect for that kind of salah? You will find out on the Day of Judgment. So let's talk about this idea of tazkiyah and say, where does it come from in the Quran as a part of deen? So let me list out the 4 prophetic duties that are listed out in the Quran that the Prophet ﷺ is to perform. When Ibrahim alayhi was commanded along with his son Ismail alayhi to build the Kaaba, after they finished building it, they made a series of beautiful du'as that are preserved in the Quran. You can look at Surah Al-Baqarah, around about ayah 129-ish, a little before that. They made a series of du'as that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved in the Quran for us to read till the Day of Judgment. رَبَّنَا وَابْعَثْ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِكَ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. And our Lord, Rabbana, raise in their midst a messenger, meaning from the people that will live in this area, Makkah, from among them, and these are the duties that they asked that this messenger should perform. Yatlu alayhim ayatik, he should recite to them your verses, meaning the holy book, the Quran. And وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, and not only should he recite these verses, he should teach them tafsir. What does this book mean? Right? It's not enough to just have the Quran. You have to understand what it means, and the meanings have come down to us through the Sahaba, through the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. No one can come about and say, like there is deviant sects nowadays, non-Muslims essentially, that will deny the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and they say we just need the Quran. We just need the Quran. We don't need anything else. This hadith stuff, we don't need it. This is clear and manifest error. Anyone can take any text and twist it any way they want. I think it means this. I think it means that. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Once you've disposed of the hadith, na'udhu billah, you can make the Quran say whatever you want it to say. You should be wary of such people and of falling into their mode of thinking. So the second thing is to teach them the book. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent over 100,000 prophets, and He sent a handful of books, much fewer books than prophets. Why? Because there were people that were needed to explain the book. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just send the book down on a mountain and say, okay, here you go, read it and do what it says. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets to show them and teach them what this book is supposed to mean. And then the next, wal hikmah, He's supposed to teach them hikmah. And this, the ulama of tafsir have mentioned, is the sunnah, the prophetic mode of living. Innaka wa yuzakkihim, and at the end, and He should do tazkiyah of them. He should purify them of all impurities. He should purify their hearts. Indeed, you alone are the Almighty and All-Wise. And then, so these are the 4 prophetic duties that we mentioned, right? So number 1, I'd like to draw one note here, is that the prophetic duty, one of them, standalone duty, is to just recite the verses. Yatlu alayhim ayatik. Right? So those people that have their children memorize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without understanding the meaning of it, yes, that is one of the prophetic duties, and that is something that needs to be done and preserved. Right? Some people like to downplay that and say, why are you doing this? They don't understand a word that they're reading. Yes, if they understand, that's even better. Nurun ala nur, right? However, if they just do the recitation part, that is also one of the prophetic duties, and we should keep that alive in our ummah. And then the next part, in the same surah, Surah Al-Baqarah, just, a few ayat down, 20, 30 ayat down, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the reply of this dua. كَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا فِيكُمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْكُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِنَا وَيُزَكِّيكُمْ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمْ مَا لَمْ تَكُونُوا تَعْلَمُونَ. As also we have sent in your midst. Remember, the dua was to raise in their midst. As we have sent in your midst a messenger from among you who recites to you our verses and purifies you. Okay, it wasn't just a dua. This is also what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, that this is the kind of messenger we have sent you, and teaches you the book and the wisdom, and teaches you what you did not know. So the astute reader notices something here, which is that if you look at the word highlighted in this kind of maroonish red, with tazkiyah, its order is changed. In the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, it was the last thing mentioned. It was the 4th thing in the list that he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant as the duties of this prophet alayhi salam. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replies to the dua, He mentions tazkiyah at number 2. He changes the order from number 4 to number 2. He brings it up in order, right? Kind of highlighting to us the importance of this particular aspect of knowledge and the deen. So this is one of the duties of the Prophet. And these duties have to be carried out in the ummah till the day of judgment. Right? It's not enough to say, oh, the Prophet performed these things and now we can just forget about them. No, the prophetic duties have to remain in the ummah and have to be alive in the ummah. There has to be recitation of the book. There has to be teaching and learning of the book. There has to be teaching and learning of the sunnah. There has to be tazkiyah performed on people as well. Okay. And we're running short on time today, so we'll continue this next time. But I wanted to end with this dua of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tazkiyah, for purity. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal-kasli wal-jubni wal-bukhli wal-harami wa adhab al-qabri. Allahumma ati nafsi taqwaha. This is the part. Allahumma ati nafsi taqwaha wa zakkiha anta khayru man zakkaha anta waliyuha wa mawlaha. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن نفس لا تشبع ومن دعوة لا يستجاب لها. And this is in Muslim. The relevant part of it is, O Allah, grant my soul its taqwa and purify it. Purify it. Thou art the best purifier thereof. The Prophet ﷺ is asking for tazkiyah. We should also make this dua. And the Prophet ﷺ used to actually command the Sahaba to make this dua. And this beautiful dua here, in which the Prophet ﷺ is asking refuge from several things that we should also ask refuge from, such as laziness and incapacity and miserliness and torment of the grave, etc. And also from knowledge that does not benefit, the heart that does not fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the soul that does not feel contented, and the supplication that is not responded to. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all of these things. Make sure you make dua for this fool and the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ in your few minutes before iftar. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.